3 years ago, when my grandparents passed away, they left me their modest but deeply meaningful home in Clearview, Oregon. It wasn't much on paper, a two-bedroom craftsman-style house built in the 1950s with creaky floors and a roof that constantly needed attention, but to me, it was priceless. I'd been helping them maintain it since I was about 16, learning how to patch drywall and replace tiles side by side with my grandfather, who never hired out what he could fix himself. I spent more weekends and summers sanding cabinets and crawling under sinks than I did partying or hanging out with friends, and honestly, I never resented it. That house held every memory of who I was before the world expected me to become something more. My grandparents weren't wealthy people, but leaving that house to me in their will was their way of showing that they saw me, not my sister, not my parents, just me, as the one who truly cared. I'm 24 now, and I've worked my way into a junior marketing executive role at a boutique agency in Portland. The job's demanding, and it doesn't leave much time for anything else, but I've never minded. I'd taken the house my grandparents left me, gutted it down to the studs in some rooms, and poured in over $60,000 of my own money to bring it back to life. I refinished the original oak flooring, replaced the drafty windows with energy-efficient ones, installed all new kitchen appliances, and even hired a landscape designer to reimagine the backyard into a peaceful retreat. I did all this not to flip it or rent it out, but because it was mine, my first real sense of ownership in the world. I wanted to live there for decades, maybe raise a family in the same rooms where I used to do puzzles on the floor with my grandma. Last week, I was away on a 3-day business trip to Seattle. I'd been pushing for a new campaign pitch and finally got a chance to present to one of our bigger clients. It went well, and I was riding the high of a job well done as I drove back into Clearview. The neighborhood looked the same as always, sleepy, quiet, the kind of place where nothing bad ever really happens. My street had always been lined with maple trees that exploded into red and orange in the fall, and even though it was winter now, just seeing those bare branches stretching out like old friends was enough to make me feel calm again. That calm didn't last long. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the porch light was on. That wasn't unusual in itself, I'd set it on a smart timer, but as I got closer, I saw the blinds in the living room were open, and through them, I could see silhouettes moving inside. For a split second, I thought I'd been robbed. My heart lurched, and I froze in place with my hand on the car door. But then, one of the figures stepped into view, and it was my mom. I slammed the car door and rushed toward the house, fumbling with my keys, but before I could unlock the front door, it opened. Standing there were my parents, Susan and Richard, and behind them, my younger sister Lily, who looked like she was trying very hard not to make eye contact with me. They didn't look apologetic. They looked prepared. Like they'd been rehearsing whatever they were about to say for days. I stepped into the house, and immediately, I knew something was wrong. There were suitcases by the stairs. My guest room door was open, and I could see clothes, Lily's clothes, spread out on the bed. There were grocery bags on the kitchen counter, and I recognized the specific brand of almond milk my mom drank. They'd been here for more than just a few hours. What the hell is going on? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. This was my home. I had never given them a key. They must have found the hidden spare rock I kept in the backyard. My dad cleared his throat and motioned for me to sit down on the couch like I was the one intruding. I didn't sit. "We need to talk," he began, his voice low and serious, the way it got when he was trying to assert control over a situation. I crossed my arms. "You think?" My mom jumped in next, doing that thing where she tried to soften everything with a warm tone, as if that would somehow make this feel less like a betrayal. "Emmy, honey," she said, "we didn't want to do it like this. But we had no choice. Things have been really difficult lately." I blinked at her. "Difficult how? What are you even doing in my house?" "We lost the condo," my dad said bluntly. "Foreclosed. We were supposed to be out by the end of last week. There was nowhere else to go." I stood there in stunned silence for a few seconds. This was the first I was hearing about it. My parents weren't rich, but they had always given the impression that they were fine, if not comfortable. My dad still worked full-time in HVAC, and my mom picked up part-time bookkeeping gigs. They had always looked down on people who couldn't manage their finances, their words, not mine. And now they were homeless? "You couldn't have called me?" I finally asked. "Before you just broke into my house?" "We didn't break in," Lily muttered, finally looking up at me. "We found the key." "That's not the point," I snapped. You had no right to be here. This isn't your house. It's not that simple, my mom said quickly, and now she sounded defensive. This house was your grandparents'. It's family property. It was left to me, I said. To me. In their will. You know that. But you wouldn't even have it if it weren't for them, she shot back. You didn't buy it. It's not like you earned it. That one hit me in the chest like a fist. I couldn't believe she said that. After all the time I spent restoring this place, my weekends, my savings, my sweat, they still didn't see it as mine. They saw it as a shared family asset, something I was merely keeping warm until they needed it. So what's your plan? I asked coldly. You just live here now? We hoped you'd understand, my dad said. Just for a few months. Until we figure things out. I stared at them. At their faces. At their complete lack of shame. And then I turned around and walked upstairs without another word, locking my bedroom door behind me. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking, and all I could think was, they really think they can just take this from me. Like I don't matter. Like what I've done here doesn't matter. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, listening to the sounds of them downstairs, laughing, cooking, watching TV, as if they'd lived there their whole lives. As if they hadn't just walked into my sanctuary and claimed it like they were entitled to it. The worst part? I didn't know what I was going to do about it. Because no matter how angry I was, they were still my family. And they were banking on that. I walked into my house expecting another exhausting round of tense silence, of passive-aggressive comments layered with fake gratitude and manufactured helplessness. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The moment I stepped into the living room, before I could even take off my coat, my mother looked at me like I was nothing more than a trespasser and said with a level of venom I'd never heard from her before, "You have 12 hours to get out. This is your sister's house now." For a moment, I genuinely couldn't process what I was hearing. My feet stayed frozen just inside the doorway, and I felt like the floor beneath me wasn't real anymore, like the house had shifted into some twisted version of itself where logic didn't apply. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mother, this woman who used to pack my lunches and tuck me in with a kiss on the forehead, was staring me down with open hostility, her expression hard and unforgiving like I was a stranger who had broken in. Before I could ask what the hell she meant, my dad stood up from the dining table and walked toward me holding a stack of papers. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look apologetic. He looked like a man just delivering paperwork to a client he didn't care about. He shoved the documents into my hands without a word. I glanced down and saw the bold letters at the top, quitclaim deed. My name was there, alongside Jessica's. But in the next section, mine had been scratched out, and hers was now listed as the sole grantee. I looked up at my father in disbelief, my mouth still struggling to form words. My fingers tightened around the paper. What is this? I finally managed to whisper, though my voice cracked halfway through the sentence. My dad shrugged, like it was all just protocol. We transferred it to Jessica. It's legal. The paperwork was filed this morning. I blinked. You transferred it? You can't just, but before I could finish, I saw her. Jessica. She was leaning against the hallway arch, arms crossed, her posture so casual it made my blood boil. Her head was tilted slightly to the side like she was posing for a maternity photo shoot, her round belly unmistakable beneath a tight gray sweater. And that smile, God, that smirk, she wore it like a crown. She wasn't just proud. She looked victorious. As if all of this had been a long game and she'd finally won. Hey, Em, she said sweetly, like this was just another family get-together. Nice of you to stop by. We didn't think you'd come home so early. I stared at her for several seconds, and I felt my hands begin to tremble. My chest was tight. My ears were ringing. I took a shaky breath and looked down at the papers again, scanning them with growing dread. My signature was there, slightly crooked, like it had been traced or lifted from something else. I hadn't signed anything. I knew I hadn't. And yet there it was, in ink, giving away the only thing I had to my name. I looked up at my parents. How? I said, my voice now quieter, like I was talking to ghosts. How did you even do this? I never signed, this can't be real. My mom crossed her arms and raised her chin like she was daring me to accuse her of something. You shouldn't leave important documents lying around, she said sharply. You've been careless. You always were. It's time you learned that. You forged my signature? I asked, louder now, the horror sinking in. You actually forged legal documents? Do you have any idea what you've done? Don't be dramatic, my dad cut in, already turning away like the conversation bored him. It's not like we threw you out on the street. You've got a good job. You'll land on your feet. I was so stunned I couldn't move. The house that had been entrusted to me by my grandparents, the house I'd spent years fixing, every spare dollar I had poured into making it a home, was no longer mine. And the people who had taken it weren't strangers or enemies. They were my own blood. Jessica pushed herself off the wall and slowly walked toward me, her boots echoing softly against the wood floors I had personally refinished. She stopped just a few feet away and gave a little mock pout. It's for the baby, you know. You've got your career and your freedom. I'm starting a family. We need space. My mouth went dry. I stared at her belly and felt nothing but fury. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I might scream, or cry, or worse, say something I couldn't take back. So instead, I handed the papers back to my father, turned around, and walked out of the house without another sound. The winter air hit my face like ice as I stepped off the porch. My body was trembling, not just from the cold but from the sickening wave of betrayal crashing over me. I got in my car, closed the door, and sat there staring at the wheel, completely still. My home was gone. My family had stolen it from me. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd burned the whole damn bridge. And as I sat there in the silence, watching the porch light glow against the snow, one thing became perfectly clear. I wasn't done. Not even close. Jessica has always been the favorite, and it wasn't just subtle or implied, it was blatant, undeniable, and baked into every single stage of our lives like it was part of the family DNA. She was the golden child from the minute she was born, with her big blue eyes and her loud, giggly laugh, and for reasons I never quite understood, my parents decided early on that she deserved the world while I was expected to survive on scraps. When she turned 16, she was gifted a brand new SUV with a bow on top like we were in a commercial, while I got handed the keys to a rusting minivan that barely started on cold mornings and was told it built character. When I pointed out the obvious disparity, I was labeled ungrateful, dramatic, or too sensitive, and every time I tried to speak up, I was shut down with some version of "life's not fair, Emily, get over it." It wasn't just about money or gifts, it was the way they treated her, the way they spoke to her, the way they looked at her like she was this delicate, beautiful thing that needed protection, while I was the strong one who didn't need anything. My mom coddled her through every emotional meltdown, every breakup, every bad grade, every questionable decision. When Jessica got caught sneaking out in high school, my parents brushed it off as normal teenage rebellion. When I got a B on a math test, I got a 30-minute lecture about how I'd never get into college if I didn't take life more seriously. My parents paid for her entire college education at a private university out of state, complete with a brand new dorm setup and a monthly stipend to cover incidentals. She lasted less than 2 semesters before she dropped out, claiming the workload was too stressful and that she needed to find herself. Instead of being disappointed, my parents swooped in to rescue her. They found her an off-campus apartment and started covering rent like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't have a job. She didn't even pretend to look for one. She just floated, existing on their dime, buying expensive skincare and posting selfies with captions about healing energy and trusting the universe, while I was grinding through double majors on scholarship, working 2 part-time jobs just to afford groceries and books. They never once offered to help me with school. Not $1. Not a care package. Not even a ride back to campus after breaks. I took out student loans, I budgeted down to the cent, and I spent weekends learning how to repair drywall and refinish cabinets with my grandparents because they were the only people in my life who gave a damn about my future. It was my grandpa who taught me how to strip and restain wood floors, who showed me how to rotate tires and patch a leaky pipe. It was my grandma who sat with me late at night, going over FAFSA forms and community grant applications, helping me stretch every penny. They were my lifeline, my only source of encouragement and stability, and the only reason I didn't collapse under the weight of constantly being the family's afterthought. When my grandparents passed, that house, the one I poured my sweat and time into, was the one thing that gave me a sense of justice, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, someone had seen me. Someone had acknowledged how hard I had worked, how alone I had been in that family, and decided that I deserved something real, something permanent. And now Jessica had stolen that from me too. Watching her smirk in that hallway, rubbing her pregnant belly like she was Mother Mary herself, surrounded by the parents who had always seen her as the chosen one, it made me sick. She hadn't earned anything. Not the car, not the apartment, not the education she threw away, and certainly not my house. She coasted through life with a safety net made of my parents' blind affection and undeserved loyalty, and any time she stumbled, they were right there to catch her before she ever felt the ground. Me? I was expected to be proud of her for simply existing. And the worst part is, I think they genuinely believed what they were doing was right. That Jessica deserved comfort and protection and inheritance because she was fragile, or soft, or whatever fantasy they had built around her. They saw me as capable, too capable. Someone who didn't need help, didn't need kindness, didn't need fairness. I was the fallback kid, the one they didn't worry about, the one they offloaded their emotional labor onto whenever Jessica needed rescuing. I was the babysitter, the tutor, the cleaner, the fixer, the adult in a house full of emotionally stunted people pretending to be a family. So when I stood there, holding that forged deed and hearing my mother's voice telling me I had 12 hours to vacate, all I could think about was how this moment had been coming for years. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was the natural conclusion of a lifelong pattern. They had always taken from me my childhood, my peace, my sense of belonging. And now, they had taken my home. And once again, they gave it all to Jessica. No consequences. No guilt. No hesitation. Just like always. When my grandparents passed away, my grandfather first, suddenly, from a heart attack while working in the garage, and then my grandmother barely 6 months later from what we all knew deep down was grief and not any particular illness, it felt like the last tether to stability in my life had been severed. They had been my foundation, my support system, my teachers in both practical life skills and emotional resilience. The weeks following their deaths were a blur of casseroles dropped off by neighbors, church service arrangements, and relatives I hadn't seen in years re-emerging with feigned sympathy and overly familiar hugs. But despite the fog of mourning, there was one thing that stayed sharp in my mind: the house. The home in Clearview wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing symbol of everything my grandparents had built and passed on, not in the form of money or flashy heirlooms, but in the form of values, discipline, and love. It was where I learned to work with my hands, where I ate breakfast at the kitchen bar while my grandma hummed Patsy Cline songs, where I helped my grandfather fix the porch swing and listened to his stories about his time in the Navy. That house was not just mine emotionally, it was the only place I'd ever truly felt seen and chosen. So when the time came to settle their affairs, I was expecting the usual tension. My parents didn't handle grief well. They had shown up at the hospital acting concerned, but their behavior shifted quickly after the funeral. My mother, always meticulous about appearances, became increasingly cold, asking pointed questions about their estate as if she were reading from a mental checklist. My father was quieter, but no less focused, subtly maneuvering to get involved with the process, hoping for his slice of whatever was left. Jessica, of course, arrived late, cried on cue, and made a spectacle of comforting our mother while barely glancing in my direction. A few weeks after my grandmother's passing, we were called to the lawyer's office for the formal reading of the estate. The office was small and lined with bookshelves stacked with thick legal binders, and the whole room smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. I remember sitting in the chair opposite the lawyer's desk, dressed in a black sweater and slacks, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My parents sat on either side of me, Jessica at the far end, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she didn't need. The lawyer, an older man named Richard Moore, cleared his throat and opened a thick folder, flipping through a few pages before looking up with a neutral expression. He began by detailing a few minor disbursements, charitable donations, personal items left to cousins, a small life insurance policy that had already been divided. Then he pulled out a separate envelope and said, very plainly, "Now, regarding the property at 215 Maple Grove Lane, your grandparents executed a legal contract several years ago, naming Emily Peterson as the sole owner of the property, effective immediately upon their passing." There was silence for a full 5 seconds. My mother's face froze mid-expression, her mouth hanging slightly open as she struggled to process what had just been said. My father sat back slowly in his chair, his jaw tightening. Jessica looked up from her tissue with wide eyes, her mouth parting in visible disbelief. The lawyer continued without pause. "This is not part of the will. It's a separate, legally binding property agreement. A deed transfer was prepared and filed several months before your grandfather's passing. All appropriate legal steps were followed. The house is not subject to probate. It now belongs solely to Emily. That was when the room detonated. My mother slammed her hand on the arm of the chair and snapped, "That's ridiculous. Why would they give it to her? She's just a child." Her voice cracked at the edges, filled with fury and something else, betrayal, maybe. My father didn't speak at first, but I could see the rage simmering behind his eyes as he glared at the lawyer, looking for any hint of error. Jessica, meanwhile, started crying, not the dramatic, performative sobs she used at funerals or on social media, but actual tears of disbelief and anger. "They never said anything," she murmured, shaking her head. "I lived there too when I was a kid. I have memories there too. Why would they do this to me?" I didn't say a word. I just sat there, heart pounding, hands still folded, trying to keep my face blank even as 1,000 emotions threatened to crack through the surface. Relief. Sadness. Gratitude. Vindication. Grief. All of it, crashing into me at once like a tidal wave. Mr. Moore, unfazed by the emotional outburst, calmly slid the contract across the desk toward me. It was already signed, notarized, stamped with all the necessary marks. My name, printed in bold letters. My name as the sole legal owner of the house I had helped build, restore, and love. My mother turned to the lawyer, her tone shrill now. "There has to be some kind of mistake. Some kind of loophole. We were their children." He looked her directly in the eye and shook his head. "There is no mistake. And there are no loopholes. Your parents were very clear in their wishes. They chose Emily as the heir to the property. Not through the will, but through a contract designed to be unchallengeable. This decision is final." I don't remember much else from that meeting, just flashes. My mother storming out of the office in disbelief. My father muttering something about getting a second opinion. Jessica sitting there with tears streaking down her perfectly made-up face, staring at me like I had stolen something sacred. But I hadn't. I hadn't stolen anything. I had been given a gift. A final, irrefutable acknowledgement that my grandparents saw everything. Every moment of work, every weekend spent under sinks and on ladders, every time I showed up when no one else did. They saw it. They knew. And they made sure no one could ever take that away from me. Or so I thought. In the 3 years that followed the meeting with the lawyer, I threw myself into renovating the house, room by room, sometimes spending entire weekends elbow-deep in sawdust, paint, and plaster. I worked late into the evenings after long days at the office, budgeting meticulously, skipping vacations, eating ramen when I needed to just to make sure I had enough to pay for the next phase, new insulation, updated wiring, refinished hardwoods, hand-picked tile for the kitchen backsplash. Every nail, every brushstroke, every choice was intentional and deeply personal. I wasn't flipping the house or trying to turn a profit, I was rebuilding something that had meaning, preserving the memory of the two people who had truly seen me, shaping a future around something solid, something mine. During that time, Jessica began visiting more often. At first, it seemed innocent enough. She'd drop by on a random Saturday, uninvited but acting casual, with some vague excuse like, "I was just in the neighborhood," or "thought I'd check on you." She'd bring coffee, sometimes pastries, acting sweet, overly interested in my progress on the house. She'd wander through the rooms with wide eyes and exaggerated compliments, "Wow, the bathroom looks amazing," or "This kitchen could be in a magazine," and I, still desperate for a shred of familial connection, allowed it. I thought maybe she was finally seeing me, recognizing the work I was doing, trying to reconnect. Now I see it for what it was, reconnaissance. She wasn't visiting because she cared. She was casing the place. Looking at what I'd done. Taking mental inventory, sometimes actual photos when she thought I wasn't looking. I remember once finding her lingering in the hallway with her phone out, pretending to text, camera clearly angled toward the newly restored built-in bookcase I'd spent a week refinishing. She brushed it off with a laugh when I questioned it, "Just sending Mom a picture, she loves old woodwork," and I stupidly let it go. In hindsight, there were other signs. Questions she asked about where I kept my documents, comments about the value of certain fixtures, offhand remarks about how Grandma would have loved what you've done here. At the time, I took those words at face value, unaware of the quiet machinery already turning behind the scenes. I had no idea she was laying the groundwork for something that would blindside me in the most violating way imaginable. The key was the beginning. There had once been a spare, a backup hidden under a loose brick in the back garden, something I had used as a teenager when my grandparents still lived there. I thought I'd removed it years ago. Apparently, I hadn't. Or maybe they found a different way in. Either way, while I was out of town on a business trip, just 3 days away for work, they used that opportunity to slip into my house like thieves in the night. No warning, no permission, just entitlement cloaked in familiarity. When I returned, the place felt off before I even walked through the door. The porch light was on at the wrong hour, the curtains drawn differently. Inside, the atmosphere was wrong, the air had that distinct smell of people having lived in it, used it, breathed in it for days. There were items in the trash that weren't mine, a different brand of orange juice in the fridge, makeup wipes in the bathroom waste bin. They hadn't just visited. They had moved in. Utilities were no longer under my name. That was the first punch to the gut. When I tried to turn on the heat using the app, I got an error, account not recognized. I logged into the water company portal and found the account associated with my address had been updated, linked to a new email. I called, confused, and was told the billing name had been changed to Jessica's. Same with electric. Same with gas. The slow horror of it settled in like cement in my lungs. And then there was the letter. My mother had printed it on floral stationery that looked vaguely like something my grandmother might have owned. It was folded neatly on the dining table, propped up next to a half-drunk mug of tea that definitely wasn't mine. The letter was dated almost a year before my grandmother passed and was written in a trembling cursive script meant to mimic hers, complete with phrases like "My sweet Jessica" and "It has always been my wish that you have this home." I didn't even read past the second paragraph. The language was wrong. The tone was wrong. My grandmother never referred to herself in the third person, never called Jessica my sweet. She didn't write sentimental drivel. She was precise, practical, a woman of few words. And more than that, this letter had never existed. I knew it. The lawyer had known it. If such a letter had existed, it would have been part of the estate file. It would have been mentioned in passing, or at the very least, surfaced during probate. But there had been nothing. Because it was fake. And they knew it. They were trying to rewrite history. They were betting that if they moved fast enough, made enough changes, and faked just enough evidence, they could steamroll me out of my own house. That if they acted like it was true, the truth would somehow bend to match their version. It wasn't just theft. It was erasure. They were trying to erase me from the one thing in this world I had built, that had been entrusted to me, that I had earned every square inch of. And the worst part? They had done it so confidently. Like it was inevitable. Like it was always going to happen. Because in their minds, I was still the backup daughter, the one who could take the hit, the one who didn't need protecting. Jessica was the one who mattered. Jessica deserved comfort, legacy, a home, even if it meant stealing it from me. That was when I stopped feeling shocked. I stopped feeling confused. The betrayal no longer felt like a fresh wound. It became something else entirely, clarity. Cold, clear understanding that this wasn't about misunderstanding or desperation. This was calculated. This was deception. And they had underestimated me. They cornered me the morning after I got back, as if they'd been waiting for the perfect moment when I'd be too tired, too overwhelmed, too stunned to fight back. I came downstairs expecting another round of manipulative silence, maybe some faux pleasant conversation pretending nothing was wrong. Instead, they were seated at the kitchen table like it was a negotiation, like I was a guest in some space they'd decided to claim. My mother was sipping tea like she owned the place, my father had that stern, practiced expression he used when delivering ultimatums, and Jessica was lounging in the chair closest to the window, her pregnant belly a prop she wore like armor, her eyes already moist with well-timed tears. My mother started talking first, her tone syrupy but controlled, measured to make her seem like the reasonable one. "Honey," she said, folding her hands on the table in front of her, "we need to have a real conversation about the house. About Grandma's intentions." I didn't sit. I stood across from them, arms crossed, jaw tight, still wearing my jacket, my keys clenched in one hand. I didn't respond. I just waited for the pitch, because that's what this was. A pitch. A trap disguised as family discussion. My dad leaned in, voice calm, too calm. She meant for this house to go to Jessica. She talked about it all the time. It was supposed to be hers. The only reason your name ended up on the paperwork is because, well, things didn't get updated in time. My stomach dropped, but not because I believed them. I'd heard plenty of lies from my parents over the years, but this one was particularly offensive. It wasn't just a distortion of the truth, it was a complete fabrication, a lazy attempt to rewrite the past with no evidence, no logic, just desperate hope that I'd be guilted into folding. As if my grandmother, who had filed an airtight legal contract specifically to make sure no one could dispute her decision, would have simply forgotten to change it. As if people just forgot to change legal ownership of property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. As if it had slipped her mind that she spent years telling me how proud she was, watching me measure walls and calculate budgets, calling me the only one who gives a damn about this place. Still, I let them talk. I wanted to hear every word. My mother kept going. She told us so many times, Emily. She said this was the house where Jessica should raise her family. It's got the backyard, the space, good schools. You're always busy, always traveling. You're barely here. Then Jessica chimed in, her voice soft and loaded with saccharine martyrdom. I know it's hard, Em. But I'm having a baby. A little girl. I want her to grow up with the same memories we had. Swinging on the porch, running in the yard. This house is perfect for that. This neighborhood is safe. The elementary school is less than a mile away. Just think of the child. Her hand drifted to her belly as if on cue, and I could see my mother glance at her approvingly, as if they'd rehearsed this. My father took the moment to slide a new document across the table, another quitclaim deed. Blank, ready to sign. The implication was clear. You can make this right, he said, eyes narrowed but steady. We can fix this. You just have to be willing to think beyond yourself. That was when something in me snapped, not violently, not loudly, but in that terrifyingly calm, focused way that comes only after years of being dismissed, manipulated, and gaslit. I stepped closer to the table and looked at each of them in turn, making sure my words would cut through every carefully constructed illusion they'd built around this narrative. No, I said, and my voice was ice. You've given her everything else. Every car, every favor, every bailout, every excuse. You've twisted yourself into knots to shield her from consequences, while you told me to grow up and deal with it. You didn't help me with college. You didn't help me with bills. You didn't care when I was working 2 jobs to survive. But now, suddenly, you care, because I have something you want. My mother opened her mouth, but I cut her off. This house, I continued, my voice now sharpened to steel, is the one thing that's mine. Legally. Intentionally. Grandma and Grandpa didn't forget to update anything. They made sure this house would go to the person who actually showed up. Who patched the holes in the walls. Who cleaned out the gutters every fall. Who made this place livable again after years of neglect. And it wasn't Jessica. Jessica's eyes welled up again, this time with genuine emotion, anger, embarrassment, maybe even fear, but I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze on the man who had taught me to be tough, to never complain, only now I saw that lesson for what it really was, permission to neglect me. I will not sign this house away, I said, each word deliberate, immovable. Not because I'm spiteful. Not because I don't care. But because I earned it. I fought for it. And it's mine. The silence in the room was deafening. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's lips pressed into a tight, angry line. Jessica let out a soft, shaky exhale but didn't say anything else. I turned and walked out of the kitchen without taking the papers. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked away from the trap they thought I'd walk into willingly, because they underestimated me again, forgot that the tough one doesn't fold when things get hard. I held my ground. Because for once, I didn't owe them a damn thing. That night, after everything, the confrontation in the kitchen, the forged documents, the manipulative pleas cloaked in family obligation, I sat alone in my room, the one I had redesigned entirely by hand, with a numb, vibrating kind of rage humming beneath my skin. The silence in the house felt poisonous. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the wind outside, seemed louder, more intrusive. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even think straight. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was premeditated deception, and they were trying to erase me from my own life. I needed someone who could help me fight them, not emotionally, but legally. I needed someone who understood what they were trying to do and could dismantle it before it went too far. Around midnight, I called Danny, my college friend who had graduated top of our class and gone on to become a real estate attorney in Portland. We hadn't spoken in a few months, the kind of quiet drift that happens when jobs and distance take over, but he picked up on the second ring like no time had passed. I didn't ease into it. I gave him the full picture right away. My grandparents' house, the legally binding property contract, the notarized deed that named me as the sole owner, the renovations I had invested in, and finally, how my parents and sister had crept in while I was out of town and tried to seize the house with forged paperwork and lies. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I spoke like I was testifying in court, laying out facts with precision and intent. Danny listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he didn't offer sympathy or shock, he asked for proof. So I gave him everything. I scanned and sent him the original notarized deed, the airtight contract my grandparents had executed with a third-party notary 2 years before they passed. It clearly stated that the home at 215 Maple Grove Lane would transfer directly and exclusively to me upon their passing, outside of any will, uncontested, with all appropriate signatures, stamps, and legal seals. I also sent over folders filled with receipts, thousands of dollars in expenses, each dated and categorized, documenting every renovation I had personally funded, hardware stores, contractors, electricians, materials, appliance upgrades, landscaping services, and more. Every dollar was accounted for. Every room in the house bore my mark, not just physically but financially. And then came the security footage. I had installed cameras around the exterior of the house a year ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, nothing major, just enough to make me cautious. I never imagined I'd need that footage to catch my own parents and sister sneaking around. I pulled the clips from the 3 days I'd been away. The moment the backyard gate opened at 10:47 p.m., my father crouched and fumbling with the old spare key, the front door unlocking with Jessica standing just behind him, arms crossed, my mother stepping in moments later holding a tote bag. They hadn't even tried to be discreet. They moved like they had a right to be there, like they had simply returned to something that was already theirs. Danny watched every frame. After a long silence, he finally said, "They're trying to manufacture a paper trail. They're setting up a fraudulent narrative to make it look like Jessica had some prior claim to the property. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate act of fraud." He spoke in clipped, confident sentences, already sliding into his professional mode. "The fake letter from your grandmother, the forged quitclaim deed, the utility changes, they're staging a false transfer. If they can get enough documentation in place and muddy the timeline, they're probably hoping that, even if it doesn't hold up legally, it'll at least confuse things long enough to make a case in court or force you into a settlement. But they don't realize what they're up against." I could feel my breath start to slow as he spoke. For the first time since I'd come home and found them in my house, I felt like the ground beneath me was solid again. Danny continued, "You have the original contract. It was notarized. Filed. Legally binding. You have proof of occupancy, maintenance, ownership. You've paid taxes. You have financial records of improvement. And now, you have video evidence of unauthorized entry and intent to defraud. That's more than enough." I asked him what the next step should be, and he didn't hesitate. "We file a cease and desist immediately. Then a formal demand for them to vacate. If they don't, we go straight to court and file a quiet title action. That'll reaffirm legal ownership and void any fraudulent claims they're trying to create. We'll also report the forged deed and notify the county clerk's office. It's a felony to file forged real estate documents." He paused. "And we include the footage, the receipts, the letter they tried to fabricate. We bring everything." For a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at the laptop screen where the video clip was paused on the image of my father slipping a key into the lock. There was no denying what they had done. No way to spin it or soften it or make it about anything other than greed, entitlement, and betrayal. Danny's voice softened slightly. "They're counting on you being too emotional to act. They think you'll freeze, or that you'll back down because it's family. But this is your house. Legally. Morally. All of it. They don't get to take that from you." And that was the moment something shifted in me. All the grief, the years of being overlooked, the weight of holding everything together without support, none of it had broken me. I had built a life from the ground up, quite literally, and no matter how familiar their faces were, I finally saw them for what they really were. They weren't confused. They weren't desperate. They were opportunists. And now, they were going to face the consequences. After that call with Danny, everything shifted from shock and survival to precision and preparation. I stopped questioning whether I was overreacting, whether I was being too harsh or too emotional. I stopped second-guessing myself. Instead, I started building a case, piece by piece, and the more I dug, the more undeniable it all became. What I found wasn't just a few moments of questionable behavior or misplaced assumptions, it was a full-blown, calculated attempt to seize my home through layers of quiet, underhanded moves that, had I not caught in time, might have actually worked. The first thing I pulled together was the utility bills. It was subtle at first, an email from the electric company saying I had successfully updated my account while I was still out of town. I'd flagged it then, thinking maybe it was a glitch. But when I checked the account, it was now registered to Jessica Walker, not me. Then came the gas bill. Same thing. Her name, her email, her payment method. When I called the utility providers, they told me the changes had been made online, using what they described as verified account information. Someone had answered security questions or intercepted a password reset. It wasn't a clerical error. It was intentional. Then I checked the water service, and it was the same. Her name was now listed as the primary account holder. She had clearly planned this for weeks, maybe longer. She hadn't just wanted to squat or stay temporarily, she was setting up a paper trail to imply legal residence, to plant her name into every administrative corner of the house. It wasn't just bold, it was premeditated. The footage from the security cameras only added fuel to the fire. One clip from 2 days before I returned showed my father circling the house around 9:30 at night. He tested the back door first, then moved to the garage side entrance. He didn't knock. He wasn't checking for mail or picking something up. He tried the doorknobs, one after the other, moving quietly like he was checking which one was still accessible. It wasn't curiosity, it was a methodical attempt to find a way in. Another video, timestamped early the next morning, showed him returning with my mother. She had gloves on and was carrying a reusable shopping bag. They didn't notice the camera mounted just above the eaves of the roof, aimed down at the porch. They stepped inside like they belonged there, like it was routine, and stayed for over 3 hours. No texts, no calls to me. No permission. Nothing. But the moment that finally ripped the last thread of tolerance from me came 3 days after I returned. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, freezing cold and still dark outside, when I was woken up by a knock at the front door. Groggy and disoriented, I pulled on a hoodie and looked through the peephole, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, it was a contractor holding a clipboard, a rolled-up measuring tape clipped to his belt, and a thermos in his hand. I opened the door only a few inches and kept the latch on. "Can I help you?" I asked. He gave me a confused smile. "Yeah, I'm here for the nursery estimate. Jessica said to come early so we could beat traffic." My blood ran cold. I stepped fully outside, closing the door behind me, and stood on the porch with my arms crossed. "There's no nursery." "You've been misinformed," I said, my tone flat and unflinching. He looked down at his clipboard again. "You're Emily, right? This is the place. Jessica Walker hired me for a remodel consult. Said we'd be expanding the guest room." I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just stood firm and said clearly, "This is my home. Jessica doesn't live here. You are not coming inside." He hesitated for a second, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Sorry. I'll let her know." I watched him walk back to his truck and drive off, the tires crunching over the frost-covered gravel. My heart was racing, but my face stayed calm. I went back inside, locked every door, and immediately called Danny. By that afternoon, the cease and desist order was drafted. Danny sent it over with crisp language that left no room for ambiguity. It cited the recorded footage of unauthorized entry, the fraudulent utility changes, the attempted impersonation of ownership, and the documented communication from contractors misled into accessing a private residence. It referenced the original notarized deed, the timeline of possession and renovation, and clearly stated that any continued attempts to claim residence, tamper with property, or falsify documentation would be pursued as civil fraud and reported to the relevant authorities. We served it directly, hand-delivered through a courier service that got it into their hands by the end of the day. There was no more pretending. No more soft manipulation. No more hiding behind family titles or half-truths. They had made their move, and now it was my turn. And I wasn't backing down. By the time morning broke the next day, I was no longer afraid of what they might try. The sense of powerlessness I had felt when I walked into my own home and found my family squatting inside it had been replaced by something harder, colder, and infinitely stronger: resolve. I was done playing defense. I was done appealing to reason or hoping they'd feel shame. I knew what they were capable of now: lying, forging documents, manipulating facts, gaslighting me, and using the idea of family as a weapon. So when I saw the rumble of the moving truck pulling up in front of my house just after 8 a.m., I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I simply opened the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and stood my ground. They arrived like they were staging a victory lap. The moving truck rolled up slow and confident, as if it belonged there, as if the driver had been given the address by someone with the authority to hand it over. The back of the truck opened, and inside were boxes, labeled in Jessica's handwriting, packed like she was preparing to settle in. My dad stepped out of the passenger seat, wearing his usual no-nonsense face, only today it looked forced, like he was bracing for something. My mom emerged behind him, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky, clutching a thermos like this was just a routine moving day. Jessica got out of the backseat of her car, belly prominent under a tight coat, holding her phone in one hand and whispering something to her husband, who followed her out carrying a diaper box under one arm. They didn't see me right away. But when they did, they stopped short. I was standing at the front door with my lawyer, Danny, to my right, holding a legal folder, calm and ready. On either side of me were two of my closest friends, Nina and Caleb, both of whom had taken the day off work just to be there, not only as emotional support, but as official witnesses, ready to document every word, every move. I wasn't alone this time. I didn't need to be. Jessica was the first to recover. She adjusted her scarf, smoothed down her coat, and started walking toward the porch with a fake smile stretched across her face like she still thought she could talk her way out of this. "Hey, Em," she said, like this was all just a misunderstanding. "We're just dropping a few things off. I know this is awkward, but..." Danny stepped forward before she could finish. "You are trespassing," he said clearly, his voice sharp and devoid of emotion. "All of you. This property is legally owned by Emily Peterson. Any attempt to enter this home without her consent is a violation of state law. You've already been served a cease and desist order. Further action will be considered criminal trespass, and we are prepared to escalate immediately." He pulled out the document and handed it directly to my father. My dad took it like it was a live wire. His hands hesitated before grabbing it, and as his eyes scanned the paper, I saw the blood drain from his face. It was the first time I'd seen actual fear flicker across his features. Not anger, not indignation, fear. Jessica stopped walking. Her husband leaned in and whispered something into her ear, and I saw her smirk vanish like smoke in the wind. She looked toward my mother, who now stood frozen near the truck, her posture rigid and her mouth set in a thin line. For a few seconds, no one spoke. They didn't know what to say. The confidence they had arrived with, the assumption that they could bulldoze me into submission, was cracking under the weight of legal reality. And then, as if summoned by some divine stroke of timing, another car pulled up to the curb. It was my uncle, my grandmother's brother, Martin, who had kept his distance from all the drama but had always been in my corner quietly, checking in, staying informed, never inserting himself unless absolutely necessary. He got out of his car without a word, walked straight up the driveway, and stopped between the moving truck and the front steps. He looked at my parents, then at Jessica, and finally at me. Then he turned to face them, eyes locked on my father. "You lost this case 3 years ago," he said with a quiet authority that carried more weight than yelling ever could. "You knew what was in that contract. You heard it in that lawyer's office. You've just chosen to ignore it because you don't like the answer." My dad opened his mouth to protest, but Martin raised a hand to stop him. "I was there when this house was signed over. I saw what your parents did. They chose Emily because she earned it. Because she took care of them. Because she worked for it while the rest of you stayed away. You don't get to come in here now and pretend that never happened. You don't get to steal what doesn't belong to you." He turned to Jessica then, and his voice lost none of its strength. "This isn't about your baby. This isn't about space or comfort or school districts. This is about entitlement. And it ends now. No one moved. The air was thick with humiliation, the kind that comes when people who thought they were untouchable realize they're standing on someone else's porch with no legal right to be there. Jessica's husband was the first to break, quietly turning around and walking back to the car without a word. Jessica stood frozen for a moment, then followed him silently, her head down. My mother finally turned away and climbed into the passenger side of the truck, eyes hidden behind those stupid sunglasses, still trying to save face. My father lingered for one last look at me, something between anger and disbelief in his expression, then got in the driver's seat and slammed the door. The truck didn't move at first. They sat there idling for a minute like they couldn't believe what had just happened. Then the engine roared, and they pulled away slowly, the back of the truck still open, the boxes they had packed for a future that wasn't theirs anymore still stacked inside. When they were gone, Danny turned to me and nodded. "It's done," he said. And for the first time in weeks, maybe years, I finally believed him. Even after being served with the cease and desist, after being confronted by my lawyer, after hearing my uncle, an eyewitness to the original contract, spell out the truth in front of witnesses, they still didn't leave. The moving truck sat parked 2 houses down, idle. My father had pulled it over just out of sight from my front windows, like he was waiting for me to back down or maybe for someone to convince me to change my mind. They didn't drive off, didn't unload, didn't say a word. They just waited. And that silence, that persistence, was more terrifying than any screaming match could have been. Because it confirmed what I already knew, they had convinced themselves that they still had a chance to take what didn't belong to them. I went inside and shut the door, but I didn't sit down. I didn't breathe easy. I went straight to the drawer in my desk where I kept every file connected to the house, contracts, tax documents, permits, receipts, renovation plans, dated photographs of before and after transformations. I grabbed the folder with the original deed and the notarized transfer papers, double-checked that the security footage clips were backed up and ready to play, and then I picked up my phone and called the police. I didn't want to. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But I knew better now than to give them another inch. I'd seen what they would do with an inch. So I made the call, explained the situation in clear detail, and told the dispatcher that I had legal documentation and a lawyer present. I told them I was the legal property owner and that my family was refusing to leave the premises after being served a cease and desist. I told them this was an escalating issue of trespassing with a clear attempt at property fraud. 2 officers arrived less than 20 minutes later. I was already standing at the front porch with the documents in hand, Danny at my side. My friend stayed nearby, quietly observing but ready if needed. I watched from the steps as the officers walked toward the parked truck. My parents were still inside. Jessica and her husband were sitting in their car across the street. The police knocked on the driver's side window of the truck, and my father rolled it down. They spoke too softly for me to hear, but within a few minutes, they gestured back toward the house. The officers turned and approached me next. I handed them everything. The deed. The contract. The cease and desist. I pulled up the security footage on my laptop and showed them the clips, my parents entering the house while I was gone, my father trying the doors, Jessica inside the living room as if she already lived there. I explained the forged utility changes, the nursery contractor, the false letter they'd fabricated and left on my dining table. I laid it all out with surgical clarity. I could see the moment it clicked for the younger officer, his eyebrows went up slightly, and he muttered under his breath to his partner before turning back to me and saying, "You've got this locked down. We'll handle the rest." They walked back to the vehicles, this time with a firmer posture. One officer stood between the truck and Jessica's car while the other asked everyone to step out. When Jessica refused, the officer raised his voice. "This is not your property. You need to exit the vehicle now." Her husband was the first to comply. He stepped out, visibly shaken, hands raised slightly as if trying to prove he meant no harm. Then Jessica opened the door slowly, her cheeks already wet with tears. Her whole performance, the confidence, the arrogance, the condescending pity masked as sisterly concern, it all vanished. She sobbed openly as the officers explained the legal situation and informed them they were officially being removed from private property under the law. They told them this was no longer a civil matter. With the evidence in hand, this had crossed into criminal territory. Jessica tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and the only clear words that came through were, "This was supposed to be ours." Then her husband, voice quiet and strained, finally said what none of them had admitted until now. "I didn't know," he muttered, eyes darting between the officers and me. "They told us it was hers. That it would be ours if we helped them sell it. They promised us a cut." I thought it was legit. It was the first time the entire scheme was laid out in plain words. They had planned to flip my house, my home, the house I restored and lived in, as if it was some hand-me-down they were entitled to. Jessica and her husband had been bribed with lies, roped into a plan built entirely on deception. My parents had gone so far as to forge paperwork and create a backstory just convincing enough to lure them in. And they'd all gone along with it, hoping I'd fold before it got to this point. But I didn't fold. I documented. I prepared. And now, the truth was out in the open. As the police escorted them off the property, I stood silently on the front steps, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The neighbors had come out by then, watching from across the street and from behind their windows. Some were people I barely knew, others I had spoken to over the years while fixing up the place, people who had offered to lend me tools, who had brought over baked goods when the siding crew was delayed, who had complimented my garden in the spring. They all saw what happened that morning. They saw who stood on the porch and who got escorted away. There were no shouting matches. No dramatic final words. Just the slow, quiet unraveling of a lie that had gone too far. They climbed back into their vehicles, my mother still not speaking, my father avoiding eye contact, Jessica still crying, her husband defeated, and they drove off, this time for real. And I stood there, not victorious, not smug, just resolute. I didn't win anything that day. I reclaimed what was already mine. What had always been mine. And I did it without becoming what they expected. I knew, even as they drove away under police escort, that it wasn't over. People like my parents don't retreat quietly. They regroup. They reframe. They convince themselves they're the victims, twist the story into something they can live with, something that lets them ignore what they did. I knew they would come back, not physically, but through the system, through any loophole they thought they could exploit. And within 2 weeks, I was served with notice that they were suing me again. Not for ownership of the house this time, that ship had sailed, but for wrongful eviction, undue influence over my grandparents, and something called constructive fraud, which, when I read it, was so far removed from reality it might as well have been fiction. Their case was weak. Sloppy. Built on a foundation of bruised pride and delusion. The moment it hit the courtroom, their arguments fell apart under the weight of actual evidence, my contract, my receipts, my lawyer's testimony, the cease and desist, the police report, even the footage from my security cameras. Danny presented everything with the same calm, meticulous precision he had from the beginning, and the judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with decades of experience, didn't need long to make her ruling. She upheld the cease and desist as part of a broader restraining order that now legally barred them from coming within 100 feet of my home. She dismissed their claims with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile them again. She scolded their attorney for wasting the court's time. And when it came to legal fees, both theirs and mine, the court ordered my parents to pay in full. The number wasn't small. Years of arrogance and entitlement had finally hit them in the one place they couldn't ignore, their bank account. It was public enough to ripple through their world, neighbors, family, friends, church circles. The illusion they had curated for so long, the narrative of a tight-knit, loving family betrayed by the ungrateful daughter, began to crumble. The whispers started. The invitations stopped. People who had always smiled politely when my mother bragged about Jessica's potential or my father dismissed my accomplishments with backhanded praise now looked at them differently. Some even reached out to me privately, expressing quiet support, saying they'd suspected something for years. But Jessica? Jessica's fallout was more immediate, more explosive. She'd taken her performance from my front porch to social media, posting long, dramatic rants in mom forums and community pages about how her heartless sister had stolen the home meant for her unborn child. She crafted this story where I was cold, greedy, vindictive, and she was the helpless, struggling mother-to-be, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her. At first, a few strangers bought it. There were sympathetic comments, offers of support, even a GoFundMe she started under the name A Future for Baby Grace. But then the facts started surfacing. Someone linked the police report. Then the court filings. Then screenshots from the original legal contract, including timestamps, notary seals, and witness statements. The narrative cracked, and when it did, the backlash hit her hard. People turned on her. Donations dried up. Comments turned from supportive to scathing. She was exposed for what she was, not a victim, but someone who had tried to con her own sister out of a house she didn't earn, and then lied about it publicly for sympathy. The final blow came when her employer, an education nonprofit she had recently started working for, got wind of the controversy. They were tagged in threads, pulled into online arguments, and eventually released a short statement saying they no longer employed Jessica Walker. Just like that, her job was gone. After that, it went quiet for a while. No calls. No more attempts to break in. No mail. Just silence. Until, about 2 months after the last court hearing, she sent me a single text message. It was short. No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she had done. Just one line. You could have just given me the house. I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not sad, just tired. There it was again. The entitlement. The complete lack of understanding. The assumption that what's mine should be hers simply because she wants it. That my years of work, of independence, of effort didn't matter as long as her needs weren't being met. That love was measured in what I was willing to give up for her, not what she had done to earn trust or repair damage. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I kept the house. Not just the walls and floors and roof, but everything it stood for, every memory, every nail I'd hammered in myself, every hour spent sanding trim or laying tile or sealing grout with my bare hands. I walked through each room slowly after the dust settled, after the legal battles ended and the silence truly took hold. I opened windows and let the stale air out. I scrubbed corners they had touched. I washed linens and replaced every towel. I pulled up the rug in the living room where Jessica had stood smirking and tossed it in the donation pile. Then I got to work painting over every inch of their presence. I didn't do it all in a day. I gave myself time. One room at a time, I changed the colors. Pale moss green in the kitchen. A dusty rose in the guest room. A stormy blue in the hall bathroom. I wasn't just refreshing paint, I was reclaiming space, inch by inch, making the house mine again in a way no legal document ever could. I updated light fixtures, replaced outlet covers, donated furniture I no longer recognized as mine. I even dug up the backyard flower beds and replanted everything from scratch. New soil. New blooms. No trace of the footsteps they tried to embed into my foundation. And something inside me started to settle. Not long after, I was promoted at work. The kind of promotion that changes everything. New title, new clients, new salary that tripled what I had been making when I first took the house. My manager said it was long overdue, that they had been watching the way I handled pressure, how I led with quiet command and followed through without complaint. I nodded and said thank you, but inside, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt like I had survived something few people really understand. I had stood up to the people who created me and told them no. I had enforced a boundary they believed I would never dare to set. And I walked away with my dignity intact. With the financial breathing room, I didn't move to a bigger place or buy a new car or disappear into luxury. I stayed. In that house. That house that no longer felt like a battlefield, but a sanctuary. And I started doing something I never imagined would bring me the kind of peace I'd been searching for. I began mentoring. It started with one girl, through a local nonprofit that connected working professionals with teens who had aged out of the foster care system or been discarded by families who didn't know what to do with them. Her name was Kayla, 15, all sharp edges and side eyes and silence when we met. She didn't trust anyone, not teachers, not caseworkers, definitely not some woman with a job and a house and a stable routine. But I saw myself in her right away. Not the age or the background, but the look in her eyes. That constant scanning, the way she looked for the exits in every room, the way she didn't expect kindness to come without a hook buried in it. So I didn't push. I just showed up. Once a week, every Wednesday, she came by after school. We cooked together at first, simple things, spaghetti, pancakes, anything she wanted to try. She didn't talk much at first. Then she started asking questions about the house. How I learned to use a tile saw. How I budgeted for the kitchen remodel. How to patch a hole in drywall. She didn't want lectures. She wanted skills. Control. Power over her space. I taught her. She painted the garage door with me one Saturday. I let her pick the color. Bright yellow. Hideous. But I left it, because it was hers. Weeks passed. Then months. Then one night, while she was measuring for a shelving unit she wanted to install in the guest room, she turned to me and said, almost under her breath, "You're the first person who believed in me." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at her and smiled, and in her eyes, for a split second, I saw my grandmother's expression. That steady, no-nonsense softness. The kind that doesn't need words. It floored me. It hit me then that everything I had built, the house, the career, the strength to stand alone, wasn't just for me. It was something I could pass on. Something useful. Something real. I had lost a family, yes. But what I gained was more powerful than blood or tradition. I gained peace. Not the kind that comes from avoidance or detachment, but the kind that's earned by standing in the fire and refusing to let it change who you are. I still wake up sometimes and listen to the quiet. The good kind. No slamming doors, no tension in the air, no pretending to be smaller so someone else can feel big. Just the soft hum of my heater, the creak of old floorboards I restored myself, and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees outside. No one will ever take that from me again.